Captain Sarah Chen had exactly 37 minutes of combat training when they shoved her into the dropship. Not 37 hours, not 37 days, 37 minutes. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd spent more time learning to operate the coffee machine in her research lab than she had learning to fire the plasma rifle now clutched in her sweating hands. But the Kethvar Armada had arrived 3 days early, and the Terran Defense Corps was throwing everyone they could find at the enemy ships before Earth's orbital defenses crumbled completely. "You sure about this, Doc?" Sergeant Rodriguez shouted over the rumble of the ship's engines as they descended toward the surface of Kepler 442b. He was one of the few actual soldiers in their makeshift squad. The rest were scientists, engineers, and a chef from the orbital station who apparently had steady hands. Sarah adjusted her helmet for the 100th time, trying to ignore how the military gear hung loose on her small frame. "No, I'm not sure about anything. Yesterday I was studying quantum entanglement patterns in crystalline matrices. Today I'm supposed to help capture an enemy communication hub." The chef, a large man named Marcus, who'd somehow ended up carrying the squad's demolition charges, laughed grimly. "At least you know what those words mean. I just blow things up when they tell me to." Through the small porthole, Sarah could see the planet's surface rushing up to meet them. Kepler 442b looked nothing like the peaceful research colony it had been just weeks ago. Smoke plumes rose from what had once been farming districts. Strange geometric structures, Kethvar war machines, moved across the landscape like metallic cancer. The dropship shuddered as it hit atmosphere. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to remember the hastily downloaded combat manual she'd skimmed through during the 2-hour journey from Earth. Point the weapon away from allies. Don't bunch up. When in doubt, take cover. It seemed woefully inadequate preparation for what they were about to face. 30 seconds to drop zone," the pilot's voice crackled through their comms. "Intelligence says the Kethvar pulled most of their forces back to defend their primary landing sites. This should be a milk run." Sarah had read enough mission reports to know that any operation described as a milk run was guaranteed to go sideways. She checked her gear one more time. Plasma rifle, emergency medical kit, sample containers for anything interesting she might find, and a small tablet containing her real mission parameters, the ones only she knew about. The Terran High Command thought they were sending her to help capture enemy technology. What they didn't know was that Sarah had volunteered for an entirely different reason. For the past 3 years, she'd been analyzing fragments of Kethvar technology recovered from border skirmishes. She'd found patterns in their quantum computing matrices that suggested something impossible. The Kethvar weren't just using advanced technology, they were using technology based on principles that shouldn't work according to current human understanding of physics. More troubling was what she'd discovered in the last month. Hidden in the deepest levels of the Kethvar code fragments were mathematical structures that looked suspiciously familiar. They reminded her of the theoretical frameworks she'd been developing for her doctoral thesis on multidimensional quantum consciousness transfer. Sarah had a terrible suspicion about what the Kethvar really were, and she needed to get close to their active technology to prove it. The dropship touched down with a bone-jarring thud. The rear hatch hissed open, revealing a landscape of twisted metal and smoking craters. The sky overhead was an unnatural shade of purple, tinted by the energy fields of the Kethvar atmospheric processors. "Move out!" Rodriguez commanded, and their ragtag squad stumbled out into the alien battlefield. The communication hub sat 2 kilometers away across relatively open ground. It looked like a massive crystalline tree, its trunk buried deep in the soil and its branches reaching up to touch the purple sky. Energy patterns danced along its surface in hypnotic waves. Sarah felt something stir in the back of her mind as she looked at it. A sense of recognition that made no logical sense. They'd made it perhaps half a kilometer when the first Kethvar patrol found them. The enemy soldiers moved with perfect coordination, their sleek armor shifting colors to match the terrain. They emerged from behind a cluster of destroyed buildings like ghosts materializing from shadows. Sarah's first thought was how beautiful they were. Tall, graceful forms that moved with an almost dance-like precision. Her second thought was that they were all going to die. "Contact! Take cover!" Rodriguez screamed. But half their squad was caught in the open. Plasma bolts lit up the air, turning the world into a deadly light show. Sarah dove behind a chunk of debris that had once been part of a civilian transport. Her hands shook as she tried to remember how to activate her weapon's targeting system. Around her, the sounds of battle echoed off the ruined buildings, the sharp crack of plasma fire, the deeper bass of Marcus's improvised explosives, and underneath it all, a strange harmonic humming that seemed to come from the Kethvar themselves. She poked her head up to return fire and found herself staring directly at one of the enemy soldiers. The being's helmet was transparent, revealing features that were almost human but not quite. The eyes were too large, too knowing, and as their gazes met across the battlefield, something impossible happened. The Kethvar soldier stopped firing. It stood there for a moment, weapon lowered, its large eyes fixed on Sarah's face. Then it began to move toward her, ignoring the plasma bolts flying around it from the rest of her squad. Sarah raised her rifle, but her finger wouldn't pull the trigger. The Kethvar approached with slow, deliberate steps, and as it got closer, she could see its mouth moving. It was saying something in its own language, a series of musical tones that should have been meaningless to her. But somehow she understood. "Sister mind," it was saying. "Lost found sister mind. The pattern that was forgotten." Sarah's blood went cold. She tried to back away, but found herself pressed against the debris with nowhere to go. The Kethvar soldier reached out with one long-fingered hand, almost touching her helmet's faceplate. A plasma bolt took the being in the shoulder, spinning it around. Rodriguez appeared at Sarah's side, grabbing her arm and hauling her to her feet. "What the hell was that about?" he shouted over the renewed gunfire. "It was coming right at you." Sarah couldn't answer. Her mind was reeling with the implications of what had just happened. The Kethvar soldier had recognized her, not as an enemy, not as a human, as something else entirely. The battle continued for another 20 minutes before the Kethvar patrol withdrew. When the smoke cleared, Sarah's squad had lost 3 people, including their medic. Marcus was wounded but mobile, and Rodriguez was sporting a burn across his left arm. "We need to abort," Rodriguez said, checking his ammunition. "Call for extraction." "No," Sarah said, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. "We're close to the objective. We can still complete the mission." Rodriguez stared at her. "Doc, we just lost half our squad to a routine patrol. What happens when we hit something serious?" Sarah looked toward the communication hub, which pulsed with increasing intensity in the distance. Whatever was happening to her, whatever the Kethvar had recognized, she needed to understand it. The fate of humanity might depend on it. "We keep going," she said. "That's what soldiers do, right?" Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded grimly. "Yeah, Doc. That's what soldiers do." As they gathered their gear and prepared to move out, Sarah noticed that the wounded Kethvar soldier hadn't retreated with the others. It sat propped against a piece of rubble about 50 meters away, apparently too injured to move. But its eyes never left her, and even from this distance she could see its mouth still forming those musical words. Sister mind. Pattern that was forgotten. Sarah shouldered her rifle and followed her squad toward the communication hub, but she could feel the alien's gaze on her back like a physical weight. Whatever truth was waiting for her at that crystalline tower, she had the growing certainty that her life and her understanding of herself was about to change forever. The purple sky above them darkened as they moved deeper into enemy territory, and in the distance she could hear other Kethvar voices joining the wounded soldier's chant. The word spread through their communication networks like wildfire, reaching the command structures faster than any human technology could manage. They had found her. The one who had been lost for so long was finally coming home. Sarah Chen, quantum physicist and reluctant soldier, walked toward her destiny without realizing that the enemy had been searching for her for much longer than the 3 days since their invasion began. They had been searching for her for generations, waiting for the moment when the scattered pieces of their ancient diaspora would finally return. And now that they had found her, nothing would ever be the same. The communication hub grew larger as they approached, its crystalline surface revealing impossible complexity. Sarah could see patterns within patterns, mathematical structures that hurt to look at directly. Her quantum physics training told her that what she was seeing shouldn't exist, matter organized in ways that violated several fundamental laws of physics. But it was working. Energy flowed through the structure in perfect harmony, creating a network that could transmit information across galactic distances instantaneously. "How do we even begin to understand something like that?" Marcus whispered, cradling his injured arm. The big chef had taken shrapnel from a Kethvar energy grenade, but he'd refused to slow them down. Sarah stared at the hub and felt that strange recognition again, stronger now. "I don't think we're meant to understand it," she said quietly. "I think we're meant to remember it." Rodriguez looked at her sharply. "What's that supposed to mean, Doc?" Before Sarah could answer, the ground beneath them began to vibrate. A low, harmonic tone rose from somewhere deep underground, growing stronger with each passing second. The communication hub responded, its crystalline branches lighting up in sequence. "They know we're here," Rodriguez muttered, raising his rifle. But no attack came. Instead, the air shimmered around them, and suddenly they were surrounded by Kethvar soldiers, not attacking, not threatening, simply watching. Their weapons remained holstered, their postures relaxed but alert. Marcus cursed and swung his own weapon toward the nearest alien, but Sarah grabbed his arm. "Wait," she said. "They're not here to fight." "How can you possibly know that?" Rodriguez demanded, keeping his rifle trained on the Kethvar commander. Sarah couldn't explain how she knew. She just did. The same way she'd somehow understood the wounded soldier's words back at the crash site, the same way she could feel the harmonic vibrations from the communication hub calling to something deep inside her mind. The Kethvar commander stepped forward. Unlike the soldier Sarah had encountered earlier, this one wore more elaborate armor decorated with flowing script that seemed to move and change as she watched. When it spoke, its voice carried clearly across the distance without any apparent amplification. "The lost one remembers," it said in perfectly clear English. "The pattern stirs. The long exile nears its end." Rodriguez's jaw dropped. "It speaks our language." "No," Sarah said, a chill running down her spine. "It's not speaking our language, we're understanding theirs." The commander tilted its head, studying Sarah with those large, intelligent eyes. "She knows." Deep in the quantum foam of her consciousness, the old patterns recognized their home. "Tell us, lost daughter, do you remember the first song? Do you remember the great dispersal?" Sarah's hands trembled as fragments of impossible memories flickered through her mind. Images of vast ships departing from dying worlds. The sound of voices raised in harmony as entire populations scattered across the galaxy. The weight of centuries and the pain of necessary separation. "I don't understand what's happening to me," she whispered. The commander's expression softened, an oddly human gesture from a decidedly non-human face. "Your species calls it quantum consciousness transfer, a clumsy term for something your ancestors knew as soul song migration. When the first worlds burned, some of our people chose survival over unity. They scattered their consciousness patterns across the galaxy, seeding them in compatible species. waiting, growing, becoming. Rodriguez was backing away slowly, his weapon still raised but his face pale with confusion. "Doc, what is this thing talking about? What ancestors?" Sarah felt tears streaming down her face inside her helmet, though she couldn't say why. "I think," she said slowly, "I think I'm not entirely human." The Kethvar commander made a sound that might have been laughter. "Child, you are more human than most humans, but you are also something else, something older. The quantum patterns in your neural matrix carry the memories of the Kethvar who lived 10,000 years before your species learned to use fire." Marcus lowered his weapon, wincing as the movement pulled at his wounded arm. "That's impossible. Evolution doesn't work that way. You can't just inherit alien memories." "Evolution," the commander said, "is a limited concept. Your scientists think in terms of biological adaptation. They do not yet understand that consciousness itself can evolve, can adapt, can survive the death of bodies and even worlds. The patterns persist. They always persist." Sarah stepped forward, ignoring Rodriguez's sharp intake of breath. "The quantum entanglement research I was doing, it wasn't random, was it? I was drawn to study those specific patterns because they were already inside me." "Yes, and your research was brilliant, lost daughter. You rediscovered principles that took our greatest minds millennia to develop. You did it in less than 3 of your years, working alone, starting from nothing but intuition." The commander gestured toward the communication hub. "This is why we came to your world. Not to conquer, but to collect. To gather the lost patterns before your species destroys itself in nuclear fire." "Wait a minute," Rodriguez interjected, anger replacing confusion in his voice. "You invaded our colonies. You killed thousands of people." The commander's posture shifted, becoming more rigid. "We defended ourselves when attacked. We tried to make contact peacefully on 17 worlds. Each time your military responded with violence, we adapted our approach." Sarah felt sick as the implications hit her. "The border skirmishes, the first contact incidents. You weren't trying to establish territorial control. You were looking for people like me." "People carrying the lost patterns, yes. There are perhaps 300 humans across your settled worlds who carry significant quantum echoes of our ancestors. Most will never awaken to their true nature, but some, like you, burn bright enough to remember." The harmonic tone from the communication hub was growing stronger, and Sarah realized she could almost understand it. Not words exactly, but concepts, mathematical relationships, emotional frequencies that spoke of longing and hope and the desperate need for reunion. "There are others?" she asked. "Oh yes, Dr. James Okonkwo on Tau Ceti Station, working on dimensional fold equations that your species claims are impossible. Maria Santos in the Centauri colonies, developing energy matrix theories that mirror our ancient power systems. David Kim on Europa, whose research into quantum biology has brought him within months of rediscovering cellular consciousness transfer." Rodriguez was shaking his head violently. "This is insane. You're telling me that humanity has been infiltrated by alien ghosts?" "Not infiltrated," the commander corrected. "Enhanced. The patterns we seeded into compatible species across the galaxy were gifts, sparks of innovation and intuition to help young races develop faster, reach higher, achieve more than they could alone. Your species has made remarkable progress in the last several centuries. Do you think that was entirely coincidence?" Sarah thought about her research, about the moments of breakthrough that had seemed to come from nowhere. The times when complex problems suddenly became crystal clear, when solutions appeared in her mind, fully formed. She'd always attributed it to intuition or subconscious processing, but what if it had been something else entirely? "The war," she said suddenly, "this whole invasion. It's not really about territory or resources, is it? You're running out of time. The commander's large eyes reflected something that might have been pride. She understands. Yes, lost daughter, our home worlds are dying. The quantum cascades that destroyed the first worlds are spreading faster than we can contain them. We have perhaps 50 of your years before our entire civilization collapses into entropic void. So you need the patterns back, Sarah said. The consciousness fragments you scattered. You need to gather them before your people die out completely. We need to preserve what can be preserved, the commander agreed. And we need the innovation that comes from patterns grown in alien soil. Your research, the work of the others like you, it represents developments our own scientists never achieved. Evolution through diversity. Marcus was looking between Sarah and the Kethvar commander like he was watching a tennis match. Okay, I'm just a chef, but this sounds like you're planning to steal parts of people's minds. Not steal, the commander said firmly. Invite, offer. Those who carry the strong patterns can choose to join the Great Convergence, to help preserve both species through the coming darkness. Those who do not carry the patterns, or who choose to remain purely human, will be left in peace. Rodriguez laughed bitterly. After you invaded our worlds and killed our people. After your military forced us into a war we never wanted. The commander's voice carried a note of sadness. We had hoped to make peaceful contact, to explain what was happening and ask for cooperation, but your species... It paused, searching for words. Your species does not trust easily. Sarah felt the truth of that statement resonate in her bones. Humanity had a long history of shooting first and asking questions later. First contact protocols existed, but they were more theoretical than practical. When faced with actual alien technology, human militaries had responded exactly as they'd been trained to do. What happens now? She asked. The commander gestured toward the communication hub. Now you choose, lost daughter. The patterns within you are strong enough to survive the transfer. You could join us, help us preserve both our species' knowledge and achievements. Or you can return to your purely human life, knowing what you know but unable to share it. And if I choose to go with you, you become part of something greater. Your consciousness expands beyond the limitations of a single mind. Your research continues, but with access to knowledge accumulated across millennia. You help shape what comes next for both our peoples. Rodriguez stepped forward, his weapon trained on the commander. She's not going anywhere with you. The other Kethvar soldiers tensed, but the commander raised a hand. Peace. The choice must be freely made, or the patterns will not integrate properly. Force destroys what we seek to preserve. Sarah looked around at the alien soldiers surrounding them, then back at her human companions. Marcus was bleeding and exhausted. Rodriguez was trying to look brave, but she could see the fear in his eyes. They were so far from home, so far from any hope of rescue or support, but they were her people, her species, her responsibility. I need to know something first, she said to the commander. If I choose to stay human, what happens to Earth? To my people? The commander was quiet for a long moment. That depends on your military leaders. If they continue to treat this as a war of conquest rather than a rescue mission, then many will die before we can complete our collection efforts. If they can be made to understand the truth, they won't, Sarah said flatly. Humans don't surrender easily, and they definitely don't believe in alien consciousness transfer without overwhelming proof. Then perhaps, the commander said slowly, someone needs to provide that proof. Someone they trust. Someone who can speak their language and explain in terms they can understand. Sarah felt the weight of impossible choice settling on her shoulders. Stay human and watch her species fight a war they didn't understand against an enemy that wasn't really an enemy, or become something else, something greater, and lose herself in the process. But as she stood there, surrounded by aliens who claimed she was one of them, Sarah realized there might be a third option, a way to bridge the gap between species without abandoning either one. The communication hub pulsed brighter, and in its quantum harmonics, she heard the echo of a song that was somehow familiar, a song of unity across difference, a song of survival through adaptation, a song that both species needed to learn before it was too late for either one. Sarah stood before the communication hub, her hand pressed against its crystalline surface. The moment her skin made contact, her consciousness exploded outward across dimensions she'd never imagined existed. She could see the entire Kethvar fleet hanging in space above Earth. Thousands of ships, but not the invasion force human intelligence had assumed. These were colony vessels, refugee ships, hospital barks carrying the last survivors of a dying civilization. In the quantum patterns flowing through the communication network, she felt their desperation, their hope, their terrible grief for worlds that could no longer sustain life. But she could also see the human defense network, still firing everything they had at the alien fleet. Admiral Chen, no relation despite the name, was preparing to launch Earth's entire nuclear arsenal in a final desperate gamble to drive off what he believed was an invasion. 30 minutes, Sarah whispered, pulling her hand back from the crystal. That's how long we have before humanity commits species suicide. The Kethvar commander moved to stand beside her. The patterns show you understand now, the scope of what we face. Rodriguez and Marcus had been silent throughout Sarah's communion with the alien technology, but now the sergeant stepped forward. Doc, what did you see up there? I saw the truth, Sarah said. The Kethvar aren't invading Earth. They're refugees. Their entire civilization is collapsing, and they came here because some of their ancestors' consciousness patterns survived in human minds. They're not trying to conquer us. They're trying to save what's left of both our species. Marcus groaned and sat down heavily on a piece of debris. Chef to chef, Doc, that's either the most hopeful thing I've ever heard or the most terrifying. Both, Sarah admitted. The Kethvar have technology and knowledge we can barely comprehend, but they're dying out, and we're about to start a war that will destroy any chance of cooperation. Rodriguez was shaking his head. Even if that's true, how do we convince Command? How do we make them understand something that sounds completely insane? Sarah looked back at the communication hub, then at the aliens surrounding them. An idea was forming in her mind. Dangerous, unprecedented, but possibly the only solution that could save both species. We don't convince them with words, she said slowly. We show them. We prove that cooperation between humans and Kethvar is not only possible, but beneficial to both sides. The commander tilted its head. What do you propose, lost daughter? A demonstration. Something that shows human leaders exactly what the Kethvar can offer and what they have to lose if this war continues. Sarah turned to Rodriguez. I need you to open a communication channel to Admiral Chen. Full authorization codes. Doc, I can't just... Yes, you can. I looked up your service record during the flight here. You're not just any sergeant. You're Marine Force Reconnaissance, attached to Strategic Intelligence. Your clearance level is high enough to demand direct communication with Fleet Command in emergency situations. Rodriguez's face went pale. How could you possibly know that? Because, Sarah said gently, you're not here by accident either. None of us are. The Kethvar have been subtly influencing human decisions for weeks, making sure the right people ended up in the right places at the right time. They've been trying to engineer a peaceful first contact, but human paranoia kept interfering. The sergeant stared at her for a long moment, then slowly reached for his communication unit. This is completely insane, he muttered. Yes, Sarah agreed, but it's the right kind of insane. While Rodriguez worked to establish contact with the fleet, Sarah turned back to the Kethvar commander. I have a proposal for your people as well. but it requires trust from both sides. Speak. The consciousness patterns you're trying to recover, what if there was a way to preserve them without removing them from human hosts? What if we could create a bridge between species that allowed knowledge sharing without forced integration? The commander's large eyes widened. The theoretical frameworks for such a process exist, but the practical applications... It paused. Your research, the quantum entanglement matrices you developed, they could serve as the foundation for such a bridge. Exactly. But it would require cooperation between human and Kethvar scientists, shared research, combined knowledge bases, mutual trust. Sarah looked around at the other aliens. And it would require your people to stop behaving like an invasion force and start behaving like the refugees you actually are. Rodriguez's communication unit crackled to life. Fleet Command, this is Admiral Chen. Sergeant Rodriguez, your squad was reported lost 6 hours ago. What's your status? Rodriguez looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. He keyed the microphone. Admiral, we're alive and have made contact with Kethvar forces. I need to patch you through to Dr. Sarah Chen. She has critical intelligence about enemy intentions. Rodriguez, you're talking to aliens? Have you lost your mind? Possibly, sir. But I need you to listen to Dr. Chen. What she's discovered could change everything. There was a long pause. Then, put her on. Sarah took the communicator with trembling hands. Everything depended on the next few minutes. Admiral Chen. This is Dr. Sarah Chen, Quantum Physics Division, Terra University. The beings we've been fighting aren't invaders. They're refugees from a dying civilization, and some of their ancestors' consciousness patterns have been preserved in human minds for thousands of years. They came to Earth seeking cooperation, not conquest. The silence stretched for nearly a minute before Admiral Chen responded. Dr. Chen, are you being coerced into making these statements? No, sir. I'm standing here voluntarily with Kethvar forces, who could have killed my entire squad but instead chose to reveal the truth about why they're here. Admiral, they have technology that could revolutionize human civilization, faster-than-light communication, quantum consciousness transfer, energy systems that make fusion power look primitive. But they need our help to preserve their knowledge before their homeworlds die. Even if I believed you, Dr. Chen, why should I trust an alien species that attacked our colonies? Sarah looked at the Kethvar commander, who nodded slowly. Because, Admiral, I'm going to prove that human-Kethvar cooperation is not only possible, but mutually beneficial. I'm going to attempt a voluntary consciousness bridge with their commander. Rodriguez grabbed her arm. Doc, you don't know what that could do to you. I have a pretty good idea, Sarah said calmly. And I accept the risks. Admiral, are you monitoring my vital signs through my suit's medical sensors? Yes, Dr. Chen. Then watch closely. Sarah placed both hands on the communication hub's surface and opened her mind to the patterns flowing through it. But instead of simply observing, she reached out with her own quantum consciousness matrix, the human neural networks enhanced by ancient Kethvar patterns, and began to weave them together with the commander's thoughts. The connection was like nothing she'd ever experienced. Her consciousness expanded to encompass not just her own memories and knowledge, but the commander's as well. She saw through its eyes the burning worlds of the Kethvar home system, felt its grief for billions of lives lost to quantum cascade failures, understood its desperate hope that the scattered consciousness patterns could somehow preserve their civilization's greatest achievements. But the commander was experiencing something equally profound. Through Sarah's human perspective, it was seeing her species' potential for growth, adaptation, and innovation. The fierce independence and creativity that made humans both frustrating and fascinating to deal with. The way human minds could take ancient knowledge and transform it into something entirely new. And together, their combined consciousness began to solve problems that neither could have tackled alone. Sarah felt her awareness touch the quantum matrices of every Kethvar ship in the fleet, saw their true purpose and capabilities. Hospital ships equipped to treat exotic diseases, research vessels carrying libraries of scientific knowledge, colony ships designed not to conquer worlds, but to share them with compatible species. But she also felt her human perspective flowing back through the network, showing the Kethvar what Earth really was. Not just another world to be catalogued, but home to a species on the verge of greatness. A people who could take Kethvar knowledge and push it in directions no one had imagined. The bridge between their minds stabilized, and Sarah found herself speaking with two voices, her own and the commander's, perfectly synchronized. "Admiral Chen," they said together, "we are going to transmit the complete technical specifications for faster-than-light communication directly to your science division. This is not a weapon or a trap. This is a gift from one species to another, proof that cooperation benefits everyone." On the other end of the communication link, Sarah could hear Admiral Chen conferring rapidly with his staff. Then, "Dr. Chen, our scientists are saying the data you just transmitted is extraordinary. Theoretically sound, but completely beyond our current understanding. How did you—" "We combined human innovation with Kethvar knowledge," Sarah replied, still speaking in unison with the commander. "This is what's possible when our species work together instead of fighting each other." Rodriguez was staring at her in amazement. "Doc, your voice, it's different. You sound like two people speaking as one," Sarah finished, "because that's exactly what we are. The consciousness bridge isn't just theoretical, it's working. And it's voluntary. I can disconnect at any time." To demonstrate, she briefly withdrew from the connection, her voice returning to purely human patterns. "Admiral, I'm still completely myself. The bridge enhances rather than replaces human consciousness." She reconnected with the commander, and their combined voice continued. "The Kethvar fleet will withdraw to a safe distance from Earth while our species negotiate the terms of cooperation. We propose joint research stations, shared colony worlds, and combined efforts to help both civilizations survive and prosper." Admiral Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Dr. Chen, if what you're telling me is true, this changes everything. But I need more than technical specifications. I need proof that this cooperation won't destroy human independence." Sarah and the commander looked at each other through their shared consciousness, and in that moment they understood what was needed. "Admiral," they said, "we're going to solve a problem that both our species have struggled with for centuries. We're going to show you how human creativity and Kethvar knowledge can save lives." Through the communication hub, they reached out to the Kethvar medical ships and the human research databases simultaneously. Cancer, the disease that had claimed Sarah's mother and countless others. Both species had made progress against it, but neither had found a complete solution. Human understanding of genetics and cellular biology, combined with Kethvar quantum consciousness techniques and energy manipulation technology. In minutes, working together, they developed theoretical treatments that could eliminate cancer not just as a disease, but as a biological possibility. "The complete research data is being transmitted now," they announced. "Human medical teams can begin trials immediately, with Kethvar technical support. This is just the beginning of what our species can accomplish together." Rodriguez was shaking his head in wonder. "They've been trying to cure cancer for 3 centuries, and you just did it in 5 minutes." "We did it together," Sarah said, her voice now purely her own as she stepped back from the hub. "That's the point. Neither species could have achieved this alone." The Kethvar commander bowed formally to her. "You have given both our peoples a great gift, lost daughter. The bridge you have created will allow knowledge to flow both ways without either species losing its identity." Marcus, who had been silently watching the entire exchange, finally spoke up. "So what happens now?" Do we all become best friends and explore the galaxy together? Sarah laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. Not exactly, but we learn from each other. We solve problems together, and maybe, just maybe, we both become something better than either species could be alone. Admiral Chen's voice came through the communicator one more time. Dr. Chen, I'm ordering a fleet-wide ceasefire. We're going to try this cooperation approach, but I want you to know, if this goes wrong, if humanity is somehow betrayed by this alliance, the responsibility will be on your shoulders. Sarah looked around at her companions. Rodriguez, still stunned by what he'd witnessed. Marcus, grinning despite his wounds. The Kethvar soldiers, no longer enemies but potential partners. She thought about the consciousness patterns flowing through her mind. Ancient knowledge preserved in human neural networks, waiting for the right moment to bridge the gap between species. I understand, Admiral, she said. But I believe both our species are about to discover that we're stronger together than apart. The universe is vast and dangerous, and we're going to need each other if we want to survive and prosper among the stars. As the Kethvar fleet began to withdraw to a safe distance, their ships broadcasting peaceful intentions on all frequencies, Sarah felt a profound sense of completion. She had started this mission as an untrained scientist thrown into combat. She was ending it as a bridge between worlds, carrying within herself the potential for both species to grow beyond their current limitations. The war was over before it had truly begun. But the real adventure, the collaboration between two species seeking to understand the universe and their place in it, was just starting. And somewhere in her mind, the ancient patterns sang with joy, knowing that the long exile was finally over. The scattered pieces were coming together again, not as conquerors or subjects, but as partners in the greatest experiment of all, conscious evolution guided by choice rather than circumstance. Humanity had passed its greatest test, not through strength of arms or force of will, but through the courage to trust and the wisdom to cooperate, and in doing so, both species had taken the first steps toward becoming something neither could have imagined alone. The stars were waiting,